Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine Zoominar producer, and I'd like to welcome you to Love, Laughter, and Tears, Theodore Bikel's The City of Light with Aimee, Ginsburg, Bikel. And I can tell you, you're in for a real treat today. Today's Zoominar is day 3 of the first annual Martha's Vineyard Jewish Book Festival, held in partnership with Moment Magazine, the Chilmark Library, and the Martha's Vineyard Hebrew Center. We hope you will join us on Saturday for Have I Got a Cartoon for You with Bob Mankoff, former cartoon editor for The New Yorker. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Sharon Kleinberg from the Martha's Vineyard Hebrew Center and Tracy Thorpe of the Chilmark Library to say a few words. Sharon?
Welcome, everybody. As you heard, I'm Sharon Kleinberg, and I represent the Martha's Vineyard Hebrew Center. We are so excited and so privileged to be co-sponsors of this wonderful series. I know we're in for a treat tonight, and we're hoping that next year this will continue and we will get to see everybody live. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Tracy Thorpe. I'm the programs coordinator at the Chilmark Library here on Martha's Vineyard. I'd like to thank Moment Magazine and Nadine Epstein for giving us the opportunity to co-host these wonderful talks. We've had incredible feedback from patrons who have seen the past 2 talks, and I'm sure that this talk will be no less exciting. Thank you. Welcome, Aimee, and welcome to Martha's Vineyard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Tracy. Please note that today's session is being recorded and the link will be available early next week. We will also take some questions at the end of the program today, so please type them in the Q&A box. Now for today's session. I'd like to introduce Aimee Ginsburg Bikel, who is a dear friend here at Moment, as was Theo. Aimee is an award-winning journalist, author, and public speaker, and has extensive experience as a radio editor and host. She has lived in Israel and India and served as the senior Israeli India correspondent for more than a decade, and her work has been published worldwide. She is the founding director of the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project, which is perpetuating the ideals and passions that were the wellsprings of Theodore Bikel's work. Aimee is the award-winning author of her first book, Theodore Bikel's The City of Light, which won the Indie Press Award's Silver Medal for Juvenile Nonfiction and the Stepping Stone Magazine Award for Cultural Diversity. Now, before I hand it over to Aimee, we're going to listen to Theo's iconic song, Erev Shel Shoshanim, a song he popularized here in the United States.
של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן מור בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן ערב של שושנים נצאנה אל הבוסתן מור
Hi, it's Sam Barker here from the Motley Fool. Behind me is Landmark Mall.
בסמים ולבונה לרגלך מפתן לילה יורד לאט ברוח שושן נושבה הווה אלחש לך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה לילה יורד לאט ורוח שושן נושבה הווה אלחש לך שיר בלט זמר של אהבה שחר הומה יונה ראשך מלא כללים, פיך אל הבוקר שושנה, אכתפנו לי. שחר הומה יונה, ראשך מלא כללים, פיך אל הבוקר שושנה, אכתפנו לי. לילה יורד לאט, ורוח שושן נושבה, הבה אלחש לך שיר בלט, זמר של אהבה. לילה יורד לאט, ורוח שושן נושבה, הבה אלחש לך שיר בלט, זמר של אהבה, זמר של אהבה.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today with you. I have never been to Martha's Vineyard, but my husband, Theo, loved it very much. Yes, he was my husband. People sometimes think he was my father. Now and again, I'll even get someone asking if he was my grandfather. There definitely was an age difference, but not enough of one for him to have been my grandfather, that's for sure. I'm so happy that you're here with me here today. I love talking about Theo. I love talking about Theo's legacy, and I really love talking about our book, Theodore Bikel's The City of Light, which amazingly, I co-wrote with him after he passed away. And I know that sounds a little bit unusual, but I don't mean that in any kind of a spooky way. And I'll get to that and I'll tell you how that actually happened. So thank you, Suzanne, so much for the introduction. Thank you, Sharon and Tracy, for hosting me here today, for hosting this festival. And if we were in an auditorium, this is the time that I would ask everyone, who here has heard about Theodore Bikel? And I would expect about 90% of the people in the room for their hands to be raised. And I would welcome them, I would welcome you, and I would tell the 10% of you who don't know who Theodore Bikel is that you're in for a treat. Theodore Bikel was a one of a kind. Someone said just a few minutes ago that since he passed away, there's nobody else like him. And the truth is that there was nobody else like him ever, not while he was alive, not before he was alive. I'm not saying he was the only one of a kind person that ever lived, but truly he belongs in a unique club of the most unique and special people that we had the privilege, the honor, the great luck to walk here among us. He passed away in 2015. So before I tell you more, I'm going to read you just a little bit out of the introduction of Theodore Bikel's The City of Light, and then I'll tell you more about how this book came about. We'll talk about Theo. We'll have a good time. It's not going to be long enough. We're all going to be very sad when the hour comes to an end, but then we'll talk about other ways that we can get together again soon. So just a few paragraphs from the foreword before we go forward, before we talk more. With the great illustrations of Noah Phillips. I don't know if you can see those. They go throughout the book. Once upon a time lived a marvelous man named Theodore Bikel. He was a famous actor and singer who was full of goodness and joy. He laughed a lot and loved singing and playing his guitar. If you ask your grandparents or maybe even your parents about him, they'll probably say that they saw him on TV, in the movies, or in the theater, and maybe they heard some or a lot of his records. Theo loved being Jewish and worked hard to make this world a better place for all people everywhere. He always told a lot of stories about the interesting things that happened to him during his long and wonderful life. Most of his stories were funny. Sometimes they were sad. The older he became, the more he told stories from when he was a small boy back in his birthplace, the city of Vienna, in a country called Austria. At the time, his name was Theo, the German nickname for Theodore. There was one memory that he loved best of all. In this special memory, Theo was doing one of his favorite things, exploring the Vienna woods with his mama, Miriam, his papa, Joseph. Even though the woods were only about an hour away from the city, going there was always a special occasion. Mama, with her cloth bag of delicious sandwiches, red cherries, sweet marzipan, and a thermos of hot tea, would settle down on the checkered blanket and prepare their picnic. Young Theo and Papa walked along the trails, singing loudly in German, Yiddish, and Hebrew. They sang Jewish songs, songs about building a beautiful new country for the Jewish people, and songs about a better world for all working people everywhere. Never forget these things, Papa would tell him. They are the most important. After their picnic, chilled from the wind and the damp of the earth, they would stop at the inn at the edge of the woods for a bowl of chicken soup with liver dumplings. The innkeeper always smiled at young Theo and gave him a few extra dumplings so he would grow to be big and strong. Theo could not imagine the horrors that would come so soon. He could not imagine that almost overnight their neighbors, his teachers, even the innkeeper would become enemies, full of hatred and malice, simply because he was a Jewish boy. He could not imagine that he and his parents would have to leave his darling Oma, his grandmother, behind when they escaped from Vienna. They got out just in the nick of time and were able to move to Palestine, which later became Israel. Even though Papa and Mama had tried with all of their might, they could not get an extra entry permit for Oma. I am old and Theo is still young, Oma said. You must go now and take my Theo to safety before it's too late. They were only allowed to take one suitcase each. How much can you possibly fit into a suitcase? During the voyage across the Mediterranean Sea, they felt excited about their new life, but heartbroken that they had to leave so much behind. Worst of all, Oma, but also their friends, their beloved books, and most of the things that they owned. That's the beginning of the foreword of our book, The City of Light. So as most of you know, Theodore Bikel, Mayor Bikel, was a beloved movie star, Broadway star, folk singer, television star. You cannot turn on the television and not see him. I have my TiVo set on Theodore Bikel, and there's a new entry every single day of every single year. And a folk singer with a slew of records, which many of you probably had on your shelves. Maybe some of you still do. Also, Theo was a very important activist for Jewish rights and for civil rights. And Tikkun Olam, making this world a better place, was what led him through his entire career. I'll talk about the specifics of that career in just a few minutes. So when Theo was already quite an old man at the age of, I think, 88, Nadine Epstein, who you all met yesterday, the publisher and editor-in-chief of Moment magazine, approached Theo, who was her very dear friend, and asked him if he would join a project of Hanukkah stories that would be published in Moment magazine and read on the air in NPR. And they'd asked a certain amount of celebrities to write a story for Hanukkah. And Theo agreed and went into his room, his desk, for a couple of hours and emerged with a story which sounds like a children's story, even though Theo was not, he was good with everybody, but he was not so great with the children. He was an only child. His parents were his best friends growing up, and he wasn't, like much of a storyteller for children. So the story, even though it sounds like a children's story, and I have shared it with many young people with great success, I think in his mind, he didn't think that he was writing a children's story. I think he thought he was writing a story about his childhood. And therefore the language, which when I read you the story in a bit, you'll hear sounds a little bit like a child's language. And what Theo wrote about were his formative years as a child in Vienna, like I just said in the intro, when all at once his world was shattered, and they had to escape, leaving everything behind, leaving their friends behind, his grandmother behind, right after the Anschluss in 1938, when the Nazis marched into Austria and claimed Austria as their own without much of a struggle on the Austrian side, as we all know. Now, Theo grew up to be such a great, successful, and really joyful, happy man. I think his trademark was his joy. But in any interview that he gave, and when he spoke to friends intimately, he always said that despite his happy life that followed, he remained in one way or another a refugee for his entire life. I think when you are chased away from the home that you live in under the threat of violence, you can never equate that with emigration. It never becomes okay. Even if where you begin to live feels good, it's not like the rest of us who might have packed a suitcase and moved to somewhere else. You can never forget that they're fellow human beings that wanted to kill you. And that stayed with Theo for the rest of his life, just below the surface and below the great infectious joy that he brought to everything that he did, because the joy was the essence of his neshama, of his soul. And the wounds were inflicted on him, you know, through his lifetime. And so there's that difference. We all have that. We have our essence, and then we have what the lessons of life, you know, the layer that put on us. So that became a story, a beautiful short story that Nadine, that Moment magazine, published and was read on NPR. And about a year and a half ago, Moment Books, the new Moment Books, together with Mandel Villar Press, the partner of Moment Books, approached me and asked me if we could publish that story in the form of a book. I was very happy to. I had always wanted to do that anyway. The story itself was too short in the form that it was to really make enough to make a book. And so I wrote a foreword. I wrote a couple of appendixes afterwards, which I'll tell you about in a while. And then I added quite a bit to the original story. It was very fun to sit there and to hear Theo's voice in my mind, to hear his stories. Theo loved telling stories, and we were only married for a few short years at the end of his life. And by that time, he really loved telling stories all of the time. And so when I sat down to write, sometimes interviewers ask me, and how was I able to achieve that seamless blend between Theo's words and my words, because I challenge anyone when they read the heart of the story, the main of the book, to be able to point out what was in Theo's original story and what I added on. And it's because I knew him very well. I heard his stories. I'm a writer. That helped. And very gratified that the book is doing so well. It's sold out its first edition, you know, in a moment. Now we're in the middle of the second edition. We've had great press and great reviews. And I think one of the things that struck a chord very, very much with our book and the story, the simple, beautiful story of a young boy told from his own eyes, a very simple story about what it was like to love his city of birth, to find nothing but positive in it, to love his life, and then to come to realize that he's hated only because of who he is, because of his religion, for that hate to become worse, for the worsening to happen right beneath his eyes, his parents' eyes, with nothing that could be done, with no way to stop it until this horrible ending. And I think that in the last few years, with the rise of anti-Semitism in our country and the rise a lot of xenophobia, without getting into any kind of specific politics, but we've all seen that xenophobia, the rise of hatred is happening worldwide. It's very scary. When Theo sat down to write the story, I don't think in his worst dreams he could have imagined the rise of anti-Semitism that we've been seeing and the rise of hate crimes in general. So people know about it more now. Young people know about it more now. When I speak at middle schools, the kids know so much about anti-Semitism and xenophobia. On the one hand, it's a thing that makes us very sad when our children know too much about the problems of this world. But truthfully, I've come to the conclusion that the kids are going to grow up very quickly. It's their world. They need to know that their actions, even as young people, bullying and mindless hate, is what brings an environment for hate later on, and that their actions now are already building the world that they will inherit. And even though we do like to wrap up our children in quite a bit of bubble wrap and pink, pink tissue paper, and tell them nice things about, nice people, I've realized that it's not a moment too soon to let them know. I don't mean very young kids, but this book is middle school and up. So yes, so I want to read you just the first couple pages of the book, of the middle of the book, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about Theo's life and listen to a couple of more songs and some wonderful things from Theo. So this is just the first few pages of The City of Light by Theodore Bikel and myself, Aimee Ginsburg Bikel, with illustrations by the wonderful, wonderful Noah Phillips. Every page is illustrated and they're wonderful. So here is how our book starts. The boy was 13. The city he lived in was all light, a city of waltzes, of sweet confections. Through the windows of the coffee houses on every corner of every lane, he watched the intellectuals debate and play chess. And although he was too young to take his place among them, it was a foregone conclusion that his time would come. The boy was a Jew, and he liked his people and their stories, their legends and their mysteries. The small apartment that he lived in with his papa, mama, and Oma was full of books about Jewish kings and queens, fantastic journeys, and a magical burning bush. His favorite book was large, very old, and covered in red leather. It told the tales of long ago heroes like Judah the Maccabee and his brothers. An only child, the boy liked reading these stories at bedtime and would fall asleep imagining he was part of those adventures. I'll read you another page. The book goes on about this and about that. I'll read you something else. The boy's family lived like these other Jews in one of the city's many neighborhoods, the Jews that lived assimilated life and were not Orthodox. But his papa spoke to him in the Jewish language, Yiddish. And on the holidays, Mama and Oma made special food, and Papa prayed with a voice as beautiful as Zadie's. After the meal, with the crumbs still on the table, Papa would read stories from their books, some quite sad and some very funny. Then, sipping from the sweet, sticky wine in the large silver cup, he would speak about the coming time when they would have their own country and when all men and women of the world would live in peace, equality, and safety like real brothers and sisters. On Hanukkah, there were even more songs and stories about courage and miracles, and Oma made her special latkes. On these special evenings, surrounded by the light of the Chanukiah and the love of his family, the boy felt especially happy. He doesn't know yet what's about to come. So I'm going to skip forward in Theo's life before I read about it from the book. And after they escaped for Palestine, what happened was they knew they needed to escape after the Anschluss, but there was really no exit or entry permits to be found anywhere. His father ran around from embassy to embassy of countries around the world and found nothing. And then one day, the British, who then, as we know, were in control of Palestine, in an act of, and I'll say this sarcastically, some kind of great generosity, decided to give 10 entry permits to Palestine after the Anschluss to the Jewish community in Vienna. So to the Zionist community in Vienna. So those 10 entry permits were divided up among the different factions of the Zionist movement, and Theo's father was the head of the Poalet Zion, the labor Zionists, the socialist Zionists. And that is how they got 3 entry permits and made their way to Palestine. And Theo immediately started learning at an agricultural kibbutz, because his dream with his father had always been that he would be a pioneer, as was the big labor Zionist dream at the time. And he continued to live at a kibbutz, but as he said, very quickly he realized that he was not cut out for that. He did not like the agricultural work. And in a famous quote of Theo's, he says, "But I did find out that I was very good at singing about the work that I wasn't doing while standing up on manure piles, holding my new guitar." So Theo learned that he was, wonderful with music, and a long story, which I'll have to keep very short, left the kibbutz for Tel Aviv and became an actor in the National Theater and the Bima, and helped found the Comedy Theater, which is the second national theater. And after some time felt like like a big fish in too small of a pond, and got his father's permission to sail to London. In 1946, he sailed to London, where he studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and then got wonderful parts in the West End, including in Streetcar Named Desire opposite Vivian Leigh, directed by Sir Laurence Olivier, including in The Love of the Four Colonels, directed by Peter Ustinov, and did so well on the stage in London that he was noticed by the United States, by Hollywood, and by Broadway. Had a small role in The African Queen, and rushing right along, he moved to the United States and leaving things out, and was cast as what amazing musical, one of the most beloved musicals of all times, and he was cast as the Captain Von Trapp, the original Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, which was on Broadway for 2 years. It made him into a star. Edelweiss, the song Edelweiss, was written for him during that time, and so he became, but he was discovered at that time also for his singing. And so while his career as an actor on Broadway and in Hollywood took off with roles that eventually led to an Oscar nomination for I'm speaking so fast at this one, for The Defiant Ones, and Tony nominations as well, he became cast in the traveling show of the traveling production of Fiddler on the Roof, and went on to play Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof more than 2,000 times, more than any actor ever. And in his parallel career, he became a folk musician, singing in Yiddish and in 24 other languages. And with Pete Seeger, who was his great friend and love, founded the Newport Folk Festival. And we're just going to take a moment out of our talk to hear a song with his protege, who he discovered, had her open for him at his big concert in Carnegie Hall. And here he is with her singing at the Newport Folk Festival, which he helped found. So please welcome Theodore Bikel and Judy Collins at the Newport Folk Festival.
Kisses sweeter than wine. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. When I was a young man and never been kissed, I got to thinking over what I had missed. I got me a girl, I kissed her, and then, oh Lord, I kissed her again. Kisses sweeter than wine. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine.
He asked me to marry and be his sweet wife, and we would be so happy all of our life. Begged and he pleaded like a natural man, and then sleight of my hand.
I worked mighty hard and so did my wife, working hand in hand to make a good life. With corn in the fields and wheat in the bins, I was, oh Lord, the father of twins. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine.
Our children numbered just about 4, and they all had sweethearts a knocking at the door. All got married, didn't hesitate. I was, oh Lord, the grandmother of 8.
Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. Now we are old and ready to go. We get to thinking what happened a long time ago. Had a lot of kids, trouble and pain, but oh Lord, we do it again. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. Oh, kisses sweeter than wine. Oh.
There's a fun little break. Okay, I'm back to a page from our book. This is after the book tells about his good times, about his bar mitzvah, about his grandfather out in the village, out in a shtetl. But all was not well in the city of light. The boy's mama and papa had told him about anti-Semitism. Sometimes the Gentile boys in his classroom yelled out insults and taunts about Jews killing Christ and about being dirty. Why are they doing that, the boy thought. They know I didn't kill anybody, and they can see that I am very clean. He tried to understand it, but it just didn't make any sense. The city of light could not live without its Jews, and the city knew it. The boy knew that people looked up to the Jews as much as they looked down on them. He could tell that the people of the city actually admired the Jews in many ways, and this made him feel proud, but also nervous, because he understood that with the admiration, there was also envy, and that sometimes envy turned to hate, so that you could never be sure of where you stood. So the book goes on, here's Kristallnacht, and tells Theo's story, and ends at a part which I'm going to tell you about now. But before I tell you about that part, in case I run out of time, I'm going to tell you that at the end of the book, after the part I'm going to tell you about now, we have a little dictionary in Yiddish where I explain to the children that if they ask their parents if they know Yiddish, they'll say that their parents only spoke it when they didn't want them to understand, which probably is true for you as well. And so I tell the kids that if they like, they can start their own secret language, and I teach them some Yiddish. We also have a recipe for Oma's honey cake, and for Theo's grandmother's honey cake that she baked for him at his bar mitzvah, which I speak about in the book. And we also have a link to a beautiful Hanukkah song that Theo recorded right before he died, written by the same man who wrote I Have a Little Dreidel. Okay, so at the end of the book, the old man, he goes back to where he had been chased out from, and he goes to look to see if the eternal flame that at one time the rabbi had told him would never go out, and that always reminded us that justice and freedom will always light our way. He went back to see if that light was still lit. And he talks about that a little bit. So in the afterwards, I write, not everything that has been broken can be mended, the story says, because earlier that says that in the story. This is true, but one of the loveliest things about the people of our world is that we often do try to fix things that have been broken. When something breaks and we fix it, it might not ever go back to the way it was, but sometimes something beautiful and new can come out of it. You have probably experienced this self in your own life. Remember the part in the story about a terrible night when all of the windows of the Jewish shops were shattered, the synagogues were destroyed, and the eternal light was extinguished? This is something that really happened in Vienna on November 9th, 1938. It's known as Kristallnacht, which means the night of glass in German. It was after this night that things became so terrible for the Jews who lived there that many did not survive. And so I'm going to tell this to you in my own words instead of reading it, because we're running so quickly out of time. But in 2013, in November, was the 75-year anniversary of Kristallnacht. And at that time, there was a president of the Austrian parliament, a wonderful woman whose name was Barbara Pramer of blessed memory. And she invited Theo to come to Austria, to the parliament itself, not a side room, you know, not a cafe, to the parliament itself, and to give a concert in honor of the 75-year anniversary of Kristallnacht. And so Theo, who had spent his life devoted to the causes of social justice, who marched in the South with his Black allies and with Martin Luther King, who worked tirelessly for voting rights for our Black brothers and sisters in the South, who worked tirelessly to free Soviet Jewry, who was an activist against apartheid in South Africa, who was an activist for peace in Israel, who was a labor union leader. He was the president of the Actors Union for 30 years. He spent his life doing what he could to make this world a better place, spoke out at every moment, wrote endless op-eds, led endless marches and meetings. At the age of 89, went back to Vienna with his guitar and his memories and stood before the parliament, where there were the vice chancellor and the president of the parliament, the ministers of defense, of culture, many other ministers, the chief of staff of the Austrian army in his uniform, and the chief of the Vienna division of the army, ambassadors, and then the elected officials themselves, and the chief rabbi of Vienna. And he gave a concert in Hebrew, Yiddish, German, and French and English. He spoke to them in German, of course, which is his language, the language of his birth, together with Yiddish that his father taught him. And you could see they were all quite tense because it was, after all, 75-year anniversary to Kristallnacht. It's a very serious occasion. And here's a Jew with a white beard and a guitar. What is he going to say? You know, was he going to shame them in any way? What's going to happen? And they were quite tense. And then Theo said to them in his charming, beautiful way, he said, I want to thank you for welcoming me here today to this momentous occasion. The significance of it is not lost on me, that the mass murderers are gone, and I'm the one here singing my people's songs of peace and freedom. And then he told them about his childhood in the City of Light, and how much he loved it, and the waltzes and the cakes in every window, and how he completely expected to grow up and take his place among the people of Vienna, but how he was chased out with the threat of violence and remained a refugee in one way or another for the rest of his life. And then he sang them a Yiddish song called Kinderjorn, my childhood years. And then he went on to give them a beautiful concert, and they relaxed. And the room became filled with love because Theo brought with him love. He did not bring with him hate. He did not bring with him the desire to divide. He did not bring with him the desire to shame or punish. He brought with him his joyful, pure soul full of love, with a desire to infect everybody with this spirit of sisterly and brotherly unity. And so he sang with his heart. And they started to sway and they started to clap, and the room filled up with something beautiful. And as I say in the book, something holy, a feeling of togetherness between people that would not naturally maybe find this way to togetherness. And he said, then he got to the last song and he said, now I'm going to sing for you a song that's only sung standing and only listened to standing. So everybody, please stand up. And they all stood up at attention in the Austrian uniforms and the other lawmakers. And then Theo sang for them, Zog nit kein Mol, the song of the survivors in Yiddish, the song that we sing every Holocaust day that says, never say never. You haven't seen the last of this yet. And on the 75th year anniversary of Kristallnacht in Austria, what happened was not, God forbid, a celebration, God forbid, of 75 years of success. No. What happened was Theodore Bikel singing in Yiddish our song of survival to the people there. And when that was done, the song, he said, I'm a priest from a long line of Jewish priests. And really all we do these days is we bless our people in the synagogue. But as an extraordinary gesture, because of what you did today, and as a way to bless your country to go into years of peace and kindness and fairness and justice, I'm going to give you the Jewish priestly blessing. And he picked up his tallis, which had been his prayer shawl, which had been draped over the speaker's podium the entire talk. I'm sure it was the first time there was a Jewish prayer shawl hanging over the speaker's podium in the Austrian parliament. And he went under it as is customary, and he gave the entire Austrian people the Jewish priestly blessing. And I, of course, had chills up and down my spine. And I looked around and I knew that, and also I'm going to add that later in the hotel when we were about to go to sleep, and Theo was, of course, exhausted. He was 89, but full power. He said, you know, they say that everybody was born for a reason. And I think today, this concert was what I was born for. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself that I would tell this story wherever I could, as many times as I could, for all of the days of my life. And that is the story that ends our book, The City of Light. I hope you buy it. I hope you buy it for your children and your grandchildren and for yourself, because it's a beautiful testament of Theo's spirit. Critics talk about it being a gentle, loving way to introduce young people also to what happened in Europe, and also as a stepping point to talk to young people about what it is that's happening today and how our actions at all times are part of tipping the scale to, are we living in a just and beautiful society, or are we living in an unjust society full of hatred? It's never too early to learn that the face of the world and the face of the society is nothing more than a composite of the behavior of everybody in it. So there really is a kind of a scale. And when we behave towards each other with love and with fairness and with dignity, when we treat our neighbor, when we love our neighbors as ourselves, when we treat our neighbor as we ourselves would like to be treated, and when we put that on our forehead, when we put that on our heart, when we wake up in the morning and go out into the world and we say to ourselves, this is a day where I am going to be someone who lets my actions tip the scale into a world of justice and beauty, then that's all it takes. There's just going to need to be more on this side than on that side. And never too soon to talk to that about our children. And this book does talk about that. I'm being told that I have another, like maybe 1 minute until the Q&A. So I'll just say thank you so much to all of you for being here. And I hope during the Q&A I'll have a chance to maybe touch on things that I didn't have a chance to talk on. As you can see, I can talk easily about Theo for 10 hours. We did have also planned for you a few more songs and even a few video clips of Theo himself talking. But we did not get to it, although I do want to propose that if we don't have a lot of questions and answers, Suzanne, I would like the video clip of Theo talking about social justice. If we have the time, I'll leave you to calculate that. So thank you so much. I'm very happy to take your questions now. Don't be shy to ask. And they can be on anything from the book to Theo's life to anything that you would like to ask. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Aimee. Thanks for taking the time to share a little bit of Theo with all of us. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. One question is, what's your favorite song of Theo's, and did Theo have a favorite song from his entire collection?
Well, I'll start with Theo. Theo, whenever you ask him favorite about anything, he would say, don't ask me to choose among any of them. They're all my children. They're all listening to me. They're all there, right there. I'm not going to choose a favorite. And I don't think he had a favorite, but I will say that I think that his favorite was his Russian gypsy songs. I don't know if any of you know them, but they're full of joy and full of pathos and full of drama, and he adored singing them. If I had a favorite song, there's one very not known album of Theo's called A New Day, and on it, it's just covers of other people's songs. I mean, I guess all of his songs were covers of other people's songs, but of modern day songs that it was a little bit of a strange album. No one knew why he chose those songs and why he sang them. But on that album, there's one song called The Lady is Waiting. And the refrain is, the lady is waiting at the end of his day. And he recorded it many, many years ago. But when I discovered it, it felt very personal, and I loved it very much. The Lady is Waiting. You can find it on YouTube.
Thank you. And actually, to go along with that, somebody would like to know, did Theo write the lyrics and music of While I'm Here, or are they a traditional song?
They're not traditional. They're written by his very dear friend, Phil Oakes. If anyone knows Phil Oakes, he was a very central member of the folk scene, together with folk music scene, with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Judy Collins, and Pete Seeger, and Phil Oakes. He wrote the song Power and Glory that some people know, and he was a very close friend of Theo's. He lived on Theo's sofa for years. He suffered from very deep depression, and which he connected to his deep caring about the problems of the world, and unfortunately he took his own life. And Theo began to sing that song in honor and in love of Phil.
Thank you. Can you tell us about the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project?
Yes, and I'll try to be quick. After Theo passed away, I formed something together with actually Nadine Epstein is on our board, as is Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary, and lots of other great people. It's called the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project, and we have done different things to keep not only his memory alive, but the spirit of his activism. So we have civic events. We support a few different scholarships and funds that have to do with activism in Israel and Yiddish activism. And then all of the publications that I put out, including a DVD and a CD, things that have to do with keeping his memory alive. So that was a very short answer. I could go on more. You can find more about the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project through going to my website, aimeeginsburgbikel.com, and click on the link to the Legacy Project, or you can go directly to theodorebikel.org. theodorebikel.org will tell you about the Legacy Project, but if you go through my website, you'll see a lot of other things that I haven't updated theodorebikel.org yet. aimeeginsburgbikel.com or theodorebikel.org. Thank you for the question. And yes, we're always looking for support. So there's products that you can buy. There's CDs, there's DVDs, there's this book. There's all kinds of ways to make a purchase, and the purchases support the work of the Theodore Bikel Legacy Project.
Great. Thank you. And we will include all of that information in the follow-up email that we send next week.
Thank you.
So we will make sure you get all of that information. Did Theo have any children?
Yes, Theo has 2 sons and 2 stepsons. His 2 sons are adults with children of their own. His 2 stepsons are my sons, Ziv and Noam. whose Ziv, it's his birthday today.
His birthday is today. So I have another question for you, but before we do that, let's go ahead and watch that one clip because I think it's an
Okay,
important
let's watch a clip of Theo talking about his feelings about tikkun olam and social justice.
Where did your investments in civil rights and social justice, was that something that was for a long time part of your life?
I can't see how I could have possibly avoided it. Having been at the receiving end of discrimination, of persecution, having narrowly escaped being caught up in the disastrous fate that befell so many of my people, I couldn't see injustices perpetrated on other people and not do anything about it, not say anything, not yell anything, not sing anything. When I got involved in the civil rights movement in the South, North and South actually, there were Jewish people that I knew who kind of took me to task. Why are you so involved? Huh? Don't we have troubles of our own? When they hit on Jews, that's when you should be involved. I said, you don't understand. You don't understand me. He said, whenever I see an injustice, the victims in my mind become Jews. It's an easy switch. That's true and to this day. To this day. And I don't understand people who think that they have the luxury of not doing anything, of not saying halt. You know, not everybody on our street was a Nazi in Vienna. Obviously not. There were some decent non-Jews, but they also did not call a halt to what was happening around them. And today, even though I have to give them credit for not having participated in the barbaric acts, I can't absolve them entirely of guilt and complicity, because non-action is an act, and silence speaks.
That was just a little touch, a treat of hearing Theo. There are lots of his interviews on theodorebikel.org, so feel free to go ahead and watch him. What a treat.
And very powerful words, which brings me to the next question is, what lessons would he want us all to know for today?
Oh, it's like, don't get me started. I hear him whispering in my ear, don't get me started. That history is to be learned from, not for it to stay stale inside of the history books and put to the side. And we know from history what the ending is when heated words, when division, when hatred is about, and that the end is never different, that history has been long and the results are always the same, and that it's time to try something different if we want to see something different. And the different thing that we want to try is to love our neighbors as ourselves, even when it's hard, even when what we want to say is, yeah, but they, yeah, but he, yeah, but them. But we know where that leads to, and it's upon us to stop and to find the way in our own hearts to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that, in a very short nutshell, I think what Theo would say, but he would have hours worth to say it.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to end on that. I'm going to say thank you in 1 second, but then I'm going to play us out with one last really fun clip.
Really fun. Make sure you watch it. Make sure you write me at Aimee@theodorebikel.org if you'd like to ask me something. If you're interested in any of our CDs or our DVD of our movies, Aimee, it's AIMEE, as you can see, at theodorebikel.org, or visit me on my website at Ginsburg-Bikel.com, and Suzanne will give you all the information. Right. And our book, I think Moment still has signed copies.
Yes.
Our book.
So again, stay with us for one moment because we'll play this other song. But Aimee, thank you again for sharing all of this information and loving stories of Theo. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Tracy and Sharon, thank you as well.
Thank you, Aimee. It was wonderful.
I hope that you will all join us again, not tomorrow, but Saturday with Bob Mankoff for Have I Got a Cartoon for You. Please know that Aimee's books, as well as all of the books that we are sharing with you this week, are, as Aimee said, available on the Moment website. They're all signed copies. And again, we will send all of the information about the books and links to all of the recordings very early next week. So before we leave, please enjoy this clip.
We're in for a treat, so enjoy.
Thank you.
My good and dear and old friend, Fivish Finkel, and we'll do something together.
I'd be delighted.
We've done for years.
Let me go to the side. I always remember when we did Fiddler together, I was your butcher.
That's
and you
right.
were my Tevye.
That's right.
It was the best years of my career.
How come?
Really wonderful.
How come they give you all these sexy lines in Boston public?
Oh, really? You know what I mean?
Innuendos.
Oh, all these innuendos, and thank you, David Kelly.
All right.
Oh, are we ready?
We are ready.
I'm the butcher, you're Tevye, and I want to marry your daughter. How's that?
Have we set it up for you?
Okay. To life,
to life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. Here's to the father I tried to be.
Here's to my bride to be.
Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. Life has a way of confusing us,
blessing and bruising us.
Drink l'chaim, to life. God would like us to be joyful, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor.
How much more can we be joyful when there's really something to be joyful for?
To life, l'chaim. To cycle, my daughter.
My wife. It gives you something to think about.
Something to drink about.
Drink l'chaim to life.
To life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I tried to be.
Here's to my bride to be.
Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Life has a way of confusing us,
blessing and bruising us.
Drink l'chaim,
to life. Hey.
Be joyful, even when I can't think to be joyful for.
Hey!
To life, l'chaim. To cycle, my daughter.
My wife. It has a way of confusing us,
messing and losing us.
Drink l'chaim.